What's up, boxing fans? I'm Michael Montero for Boxing Monthly. You're watching the Neutral Corner for the week of April 2nd. All right, so the new issue of Boxing Monthly, the April issue, is out. And guess what? This issue happens to have a piece written by yours truly about one Gennady Triple G Golovkin. So be sure to check it out in this issue. And special thanks to Team Golovkin for doing the interviews. I did phone interviews with Gennady, with Tom Loeffler, with Abel Sanchez. Thanks to Bernie myself for putting all that together. And be sure to check it out. Also in the issue, of course, it's the preview to Canelo Khan. And, my Triple G piece kind of works right into that because, of course, he wants the winner of that fight. He wants that title belt. So be sure to check that out, guys. But let's get into some news and notes. So first, let's start with Adrien Broner, who calls himself AB for about billions. Maybe we could change that to asshole bowler because there's a warrant out for his arrest right now. He has not been arrested, but word has it that he will turn himself in, I guess, next week after his fight. He has a fight coming up this Friday, but back in January, he assaulted a guy at a bowling alley. Apparently, he was gambling with some guy and lost, I want to say it was over like $10,000 to some guy. Like, how many damn games of bowling? Like, how many dollars per pin were you betting, Adrien? This guy has dozens of kids at home. I don't know, man. This guy's priorities, He wasn't training yet for his fight, I guess, back in January, so he had some downtime. I get that, but dude, you got kids to feed. You got a bowling alley gambling with some guy. But apparently, Adrien lost, and this guy wanted him to pay up. Adrien confronted him in the parking lot, threatened him with a gun, and then assaulted him, and apparently knocked him out unconscious. So the guy, made a police report and is threatening, I don't know if it's a lawsuit or what, but there's a warrant out for Adrien Broner's arrest. But apparently the fight is still on for this Friday. We'll talk more about that later. So more to come with Adrien Broner, who it seems, every year he's in an interesting fight, and every year he's arrested for something, and every year he has a baby. That just seems to be the pattern with him. More news and notes. Shane Mosley, a guy who really shouldn't be fighting, and there just seems to be a pattern with several guys that just can't let it go. You guys know how I feel about this thing, but he has a fight coming up, I believe it's in May, against David Avanzian. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that because I never heard of the guy he's fighting, but it's for a WBA interim welterweight title. A WBA, whatever the fuck, welterweight title. The WBA will do anything for a sanctioning fee. Obviously, Shane Mosley is not a top 20, 30 welterweight in the world. He hasn't been for, a decade? The guy's done. But the WBA is going to sanction this fight for an interim title. The WBA would, they'd do anything. They would make love to Michael Jackson's corpse, which probably hasn't rotted that bad because it was all plastic anyway, for a sanctioning fee. They would do whatever it took to get a sanctioning fee. That's the WBA for you. But there is a fight right there that, I'm not going to cover, not going to watch, don't care. Not that I dislike Shane Mosley, cool guy, getting a little crazy on social media these days, getting a little wacky on the Twitter account there. Makes me wonder about his health upstairs sometimes, but, just not interested in this fight. But, looking at April, we have a really, really loaded schedule, man. I'm going to an LA Fight Club this Friday. We'll talk more about that later. Of course, we have the Mayweather-Pacquiao card. I'm sorry. Did I just say Mayweather-Pacquiao? Holy shit. I meant Pacquiao-Bradley III. Oh, shit. I should edit that out, but I'm going to leave it in just for the haters. We have that card coming up. Another LA Fight Club in the middle of the month, Jesus Soto Karass versus Yoshihiro Kamagai. I'm really excited for that one. Of course, we have Golovkin Wade, which I wrote about in my piece for Boxing Monthly. We have Ortiz Berto, the rematch. That's going down at the StubHub Center, April 30th. And then the first week of May, we have Canelo, which again, the cover story in this month's Boxing Monthly. So just a really, really loaded April into the big fight in May, which, let's face it, that Canelo fight is the biggest fight on paper of the year so far. It's the biggest event, and it's a stacked card top to bottom. So, I briefly talked about the Pacquiao-Bradley III fight, and look, ticket sales are going very, very poorly. Steve Kim tweeted out how, and he wrote about this in a column as well this week, how they're offering room ticket packages at the casino for that event. And when you see them start to do that, that means ticket sales are really, really down. Here's what I'll say about that. If you're somebody who within proximity to Las Vegas and you've never been able to see Manny Pacquiao live, this is probably going to be your chance to do it affordably. No doubt they're going to be discounting the hell out of tickets next week for that fight. So, hey man, like I said, you got proximity to Vegas, you want to go see Manny Pacquiao because tickets for his fights have been very expensive in recent years when he was, really, really popular. This is a chance. But look, there's no buzz about this fight, man. Nothing on social media that I'm seeing. And honestly, the victims in all this, Pacquiao's getting his guaranteed payday from Bob Arum. But the victim is really Timothy Bradley, because he deserves some spotlight for all the work he's put in recent years in his career. And as I understand it, the deal he has worked out for this fight, he gets upside of the pay-per-view sales once it hits a certain mark, which it's probably not going to hit. So, Timothy Bradley's suffering here, and some of the undercard fighters are suffering as well because they just deserve more exposure than they're getting. Like I said, Pacquiao's getting his guaranteed rate, man. You guys know how I feel about this whole thing between Pacquiao and Mayweather, and that's why I think I had the Freudian slip earlier. I'm just ready for these guys to walk away into the sunset. I hope this will be Pacquiao's last fight, but I don't think it will be. We'll talk more about that next week. Some other news and notes, just real quick, some of the HBO bias with the Andre Ward-Sullivan Barrera fight this weekend with some of the commentary. I'm going to talk more about that later. Just kind of wanted to get that in everyone's heads. And of course, the big thing this weekend, Nick Blackwell, who took a beating at the hands of Chris Eubank Jr. over in the UK Saturday. I'm going to talk more about that later. There were medical issues with Blackwell. There's a lot going back and forth between boxing fans about, should that fight have been stopped? Should trainer Gary Lockett have stopped it? I'm going to talk more about that later in the episode. So let's go ahead and get into the fight reviews of last week's action. So Friday night here in California, in Palm Springs, Antonio Orozco scores a first-round knockout over Miguel Acosta, who now has lost 5 in a row, 6 of his last 7. You guys know I talked about this last week with Orozco. He had a good win over Humberto Soto last October that I was ringside for. And you saw some growth and development, some learning on the job there. That was a quality win, which I thought propelled him from a prospect into a junior contender. This was a massive step back. This fight lasted 1 minute and 54 seconds. I don't know why we needed to see this fight. But that really summed up what happened Friday night. There were other prospects on that card that won, like Jason Quigley, who improved and kept his knockout streak going. I think he's had a few in a row now. But again, Quigley was fighting a guy that just put up nothing, absolutely nothing. So some of these prospects, and especially Orozco, who I think is graduated from the prospect level, we need to see them have some better opposition in their next fight. Saturday, over in the UK, a couple of big fights. Now, I talked just a minute ago about the fight at Wembley in London, where Chris Eubank scored a TKO in the 10th round over Nick Blackwell. And this was a competitive fight early on, but in the middle rounds, it started to change. And in the 7th round, I'm sure some of you guys have seen the GIFs going around on Twitter and Instagram and stuff. There was just a barrage of punches landed by Eubank. He really started to tee off. It was just beating up Nick Blackwell. To Blackwell's credit, he kept fighting and he kept trying to compete. But from that 7th round forward, there was no reason for this fight to continue. It should have been stopped. And Chris Eubank Sr., kind of hinted to it in the corner with his son, telling him, hey man, I don't know why they're not stopping this fight. I'm paraphrasing, but I don't know why they're not stopping this fight. I don't think they're going to. Maybe you should go to the body a little more. Maybe you can get this guy out of here if you go down to the body. So he was giving his son advice, but he was also hinting to the fact they're not going to stop this damn fight. So change up tactics to get this guy out of here before he gets hurt. Looking at Blackwell, okay? Some of you guys on Twitter have really given me a lot of shit about this. And not just me, but other people who protested this fight continuing. And a lot of you guys have been saying, look, he was punching back. He was punching back. Guys, nuance matters, okay? Every fight's different. And there was one of you out there who said, you know, should they have stopped Gotti Ward in the 9th round, that first fight when Gotti was put down? And comparing Arturo Gotti to Blackwell, apples and oranges, okay? Chris Eubank Jr. doesn't even compare to Arturo Gotti or Mickey Ward yet at this stage of his career. He may surpass those guys, but he doesn't even compare to them yet, okay? And he was the winner of this fight. So I don't think comparisons like that fit here. You look at Nick Blackwell, who was losing the fight badly in that 7th round, and in the 8th, 9th, and 10th was just getting beat up. Wasn't as bad as what Antoine Douglas went through a few weeks ago, right? Where I talked about how that fight should have been stopped. The difference with Blackwell here is he was punching back, but it was reflex. It was taking 10 punches and nothing on it. Taking 10 more punches, nothing on it. Eubank was walking through everything coming back. It looked to me more like Blackwell was throwing a reflex punch out. Totally wasn't with it, just reflex punch out to keep the ref from stopping it. He was being a brave fighter, which we commend him for. And that's when the corner has to do the right thing. This comes down on Gary Lockett, okay? For those of you who don't know yet, if you've been sleeping under a rock, Nick Blackwell collapsed after this fight, was placed in a medically induced coma, which at the point where I'm filming this right now is still in it. He had a brain bleed. This is the same thing that has killed thousands of fighters in the ring going back decades, all over the world, okay? This is a problem in boxing. If the fighter doesn't want to quit, if the referee doesn't want to do their job because they see the guy punching back, the corner has to know their fighter. Guys, Nick Blackwell he's got 8 knockouts in 23 total fights coming into this fight. It's now 8 knockouts in 24 fights. The guy has a knockout ratio of 33%. He had no chance of winning this fight. Wasn't going to win a decision, had no chance of stopping Eubank, was taking a beating. His face was grotesquely swollen, okay? Even if he didn't have a brain injury, that eye, look what happened to Antonio Margarito against Manny Pacquiao. That fight should have been stopped. Remember a few years back when Manny Pacquiao was beating up Antonio Margarito and looked at the ref a few times? Like, dude, dude, are you going to stop this? Are you going to stop this? That was kind of what was happening here. The corner has to step in and stop this type of fight. Obviously, Nick Blackwell's fighting days are over. His life is forever changed. He may never get full functionality back as a human being. Maybe he will, okay? But for him to risk all of this for a moral victory is stupid. And that's why I tweeted out, boxing should adopt the MMA tap-out culture sometimes. Yes, Conor McGregor got dissed because he tapped out a couple weeks back against, I think it was Nate Diaz is the guy's name. And, you know, hey, man, he lost that fight and, you know, he kind of got his comeuppance for all the trash he talked. But what's wrong with tapping out sometimes and fighting another day? I think back to Vitaly Klitschko losing against Chris Bird, where he couldn't use one freaking arm. He couldn't use one shoulder. It was so blown out. Even though he was dominating the fight, he quit on the stool. He was heavily criticized by, I remember Larry Merchant laid into his ass, right? And the American boxing press was just shitting down the guy's throat. Well, guess what? Vitaly Klitschko rehabbed the shoulder. He came back and put on a hell of a fight against Lennox Lewis. And all of a sudden, the American boxing media loved Vitaly Klitschko. He ended up being the #1 ranked heavyweight for a while. He may not have had the opportunity to do that had he fought 3 extra rounds or whatever it was against Chris Bird and damaged his shoulder to a point where there was unrepairable damage. Think about that for a second, okay? Another fight on that card, Hughie Fury beat Dominic Gwynn. I talked about this last week. You know, for Hughie Fury to really impress me, I wanted him to stop Dominic Gwynn. He didn't do it. He won every round of the fight, but a corpse could probably beat Dominic Gwynn right now, right? Ray Charles could probably, Stevie Wonder could probably win a unanimous decision over Dominic Gwynn. Hughie Fury is 19-0 with 10 knockouts. For a young prospect fighting the level of opposition he has, he should have 17, 18 knockouts for us to really be excited. Combined record of Hughie Fury's opponents, 222, 235, and 17. That kind of record, this guy should have more knockouts than that. So I'm sorry, not buying Hughie Fury stock. Not a believer yet. Not buying Hughie Fury stock. The other fight in the UK over in Sheffield, Kell Brook scored a second-round TKO over Kevin Bezier. After the fight, he called out Floyd Mayweather and Danny Garcia. Calling out Floyd Mayweather at this point, and if you're anybody other than Danny Garcia, is pointless. Floyd ain't going to fight anybody unless it's an easy target. That's been Floyd's MO for the last 10 years. So when Floyd comes back next year, he's probably going to fight a guy like a Danny Garcia or somebody else controlled by Al Heyman. He's not going to fight Kell Brook. Kell Brook calling out Danny Garcia, I like that. That's the type of matchup I think we need to see in boxing. Of course, it's not going to happen. For Kell Brook to get a meaningful fight, he's going to have to come over to America again and fight a guy like Sean Porter. It's just the only way he's going to get it. He's not going to get any of these guys to pack up and go over to the UK. So Kell Brook and his people need to start negotiating with the American promoters and be willing to come over here. He does have a title. He needs to see if he can do some kind of unification match. That title could be a bargaining chip, but he's going to have to hit the road. Now, coming here to the American fight at Oracle Arena up in Oakland. Let's start with the co-feature. Joseph Diaz, my prospect of the year, 2015, scored a entertaining, workmanlike, dominant decision over Puerto Rican Jason Velez. He beat Velez better than Ronnie Rios did last year when Rios gave Velez his first loss on that Cotto Canelo undercard. Diaz improved to 20-0 with 11 knockouts. And Diaz pretty much does everything well. He goes downstairs, upstairs, mixes his punches well. His spacing and timing is pretty good. It can improve a little bit, but he uses length well. He just really does everything well. Good angles. I like what he does. And Jason Velez was in incredible shape for this fight. A lot of fighters at that level, at Jason Velez level, who weren't in impeccable shape would have been out of there, okay? So for Velez to hang in like he did, he really showed some grit. Thought it was a great learning lesson for Diaz to go all those rounds, and it was a great introduction to the HBO boxing, space. The one thing Diaz is missing, though, is the eraser, and I tweeted about that. He just doesn't have that one-punch, knockout, concussive kind of power. And he happens to fight in the division at welterweight, which is loaded, which top to bottom is probably the best division in boxing right now. So it's going to be difficult for Diaz, but he's going to be in good fights. These fights, if they start happening, if we start seeing some of these younger guys fight some of these title holders over the next couple of years, we're going to see some really, really good fights at featherweight. And Joseph Diaz, I do think eventually he's going to grab himself a title. The thing that's going to hold him back is power. But we've seen guys like Vasyl Lomachenko doesn't really have world-class power, but has enough to keep guys honest and uses skills to win big fights, right? Like he did against Gary Russell. Joseph Diaz might be one of those kind of guys, especially with the way he goes down to the body. But the main event, Andre Ward scored a unanimous decision over Sullivan Barrera. The scores were 119-107 and 117-109 twice. He dropped Sullivan Barrera in the third round. It was a counter left hook. Hit Barrera like in the top of the head. It was an equilibrium kind of shot. Barrera just didn't see it coming. It literally hit him on the top of the head, and he went down. More of a flash knockdown, but it was, impressive to see that. Let's talk a little bit about Andre Ward's performance. First of all, let's start with the HBO commentating, which I just thought was just bananas. It was just a little bit too much for me, okay? I watched this fight live on a foreign feed because I wanted to see it without HBO commentators. I watched it with a British feed, and watching it where on the network I watched it on, the commentary was favorable towards Ward because Ward is a world-class talent and he was dominating the fight, but it wasn't sucking his dick. When I watched the HBO replay, whoa! You would have thought Andre Ward was fighting the second coming of I don't know, one of the all-time great light heavyweights ever. You just would have thought he was fighting Roy Jones in his prime or something. He was fighting a guy in Sullivan Barrera who, yes, was undefeated, right? Undefeated as a pro. Had a pretty good amateur record in the Cuban system. It's not like he went to an Olympics or won a world championships or anything, though. Sullivan Barrera, I think the best he did is he got a bronze in the Cuban championships. So, he was a top Cuban amateur. But globally, to my knowledge, he never won any world championships or went to an Olympics or anything like that and got medals. But still, a good amateur, a guy who knows what he's doing in there, schooled very well, undefeated as a pro. But his best opponent was Karo Murat. That was his best opponent, and that was his last fight. And even Murat was landing shots on him. Barrera has average hand speed, maybe slightly above average hand speed for a light heavyweight, but his feet are really slow. Just in molasses all night. And after that third round knockdown, he was pretty much on the defensive. He was very, very pensive to throw punches. And I thought Andre Ward showed that real mean streak he has by, elbowing, headbutting, hitting low, hitting after the bell, hitting on the clinch, doing all the dirty kind of tactics he does to win fights. And the thing is, the ref let him get away with it for the most part. And so did Barrera. The ref did take 1 point at one point in the fight, later on in the fight. But by then the writing was on the wall. If you let a guy do some of that stuff early, sometimes it kind of creates a dynamic where by the time you take a point, it doesn't really matter. And it didn't matter in this fight. There was an announced crowd of 8,532. And the HBO commentators were saying there was over 10,000 there. That's bullshit. There wasn't. Let me tell you guys what an announced crowd of means. That doesn't necessarily mean number of tickets sold. Okay, so this 8532 number isn't necessarily the amount of tickets sold. That's how many people were physically in the arena. That includes gimmies, that includes everything. So who knows? Maybe 6,000 tickets are sold, maybe 4,000, maybe 8,000. We don't know. But 8532 is who showed up, okay? HBO also made a really, really big deal about all the Golden State Warriors in the house, like Steph Curry and all that stuff. What they didn't tell you is that the Golden State Warriors had a game the next day in the same building. They play in that same building, and they were playing the team with the worst record in the NBA. So they were kind of on autopilot and hanging out, watching their boy Andre Ward. As Steve Kim talked about, him and Gabriel Montoya talked about in the next round this week, it's not as if the Golden State Warriors took a private jet from their game in New York, across the country to see Andre Ward, right? I go to fights here in LA at Staples and stuff, and you see LA Lakers and LA Clippers at the games. You see some of the baseball players for the Dodgers and stuff, at the fights. You see them at the fights. You see some actors and stuff at the fights. They're gimme tickets. They're already there, so they show up. That's kind of what this was. Sullivan Barrera landed 111 of 722 punches for 15%. Andre Ward landed 166 punches of 463 for 36%. For Andre Ward, that's actually more offensive than usual. He did a good job of nullifying Barrera, but he threw more than he usually throws. Only landed 36% against Sullivan Barrera. Makes me scratch my head a little bit. Against Sergey Kovalev, I don't think he's going to throw that many punches. I certainly don't know if he'll land that many, but even if he does, even if he lands 36% of about 400 punches, is that going to be enough to get it done against Sergey Kovalev? Ward earned $1.85 million for this fight. Sullivan Barrera earned $450,000. So Sullivan Barrera got a quarter of what Andre Ward got. I guess that's deserved, you know. But for some of you guys talking about 50-50 for the fight with Golovkin or blah, 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 blah. Well, look at the purses for this fight. Look at the purses for Andre Ward's last few fights. I don't know, man. Let's talk about the Kovalev fight real quick. It's supposed to happen in November. And Sergey Kovalev is taking a stay busy fight in Russia this summer. Everyone knows about this. Kathy Duva at Main Events has made it very, very clear to everybody in the media. That's what they're doing. Even HBO talked about that. But Andre Ward is saying, I'm going to fight Sergey Kovalev. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But he's not committing to a time. And the commentators at HBO, Max Kellerman, Roy Jones, and even Jim Lampley dived in, saying, you know, this guy needs not one more tune-up, but two more tune-ups before he fights Sergey Kovalev. And I just found that to be a little distasteful. You're basically saying it's okay for this guy to delay it as long as he wants. One telling quote, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but at the very end of the broadcast, Jim Lampley said, you know, if you're boxing fans, you can't wait for the Kovalev-Ward matchup. If you're Sergey Kovalev, who is ringside, you can't wait for that matchup. If you're Andre Ward, you're going to wait until everything is perfect, and then you'll take the fight. Look, that sentence right there sums up why there was 85-32 in the house to watch this guy fight in his backyard. Okay? It sums up why he's making $1.85 million right now at this stage of his career where he's been fighting for over a decade as a pro. And he's won titles and everything else. And he's pound for pound among the best in the world. It sums up why so many boxing fans and media see him as a polarizing figure. It's Andre Ward's prerogative to fight who he wants, when he wants, that's fine. If you would rather sit on the sideline and go through litigation with your promoter than stay busy. If you'd rather sit on the sideline and not fight until you get the exact purse you want, or sit on the sidelines or fight guys like this for small money until you are perfectly right for the Sergey Kovalev fight, that's your right. But don't cry racism, prejudice, placism, favoritism, all these isms when boxing fans aren't screaming your name and showing up and selling out the arena you fight in. And they're going to see other guys because those other guys are staying busy and they are making concessions and they're fighting when it isn't perfect for them. My prediction is Ward Kovalev will happen. I don't know if it'll happen this year, might happen next year. It'll happen when it's perfect for Andre Ward. It will be less than perfect in regards to timing, health, or something else for Sergey Kovalev. And I think Andre Ward's going to win a close, controversial, disputed decision in an agonizingly frustrating fight to watch. That's what I think. Sorry to be a pessimist. Not a lot of action going on this week. Everything is really, really kicking off next week. But there's some action. As I mentioned earlier in this episode, there's a LA Fight Club this Friday. Guys, go to Ring TV and watch this fight. Stream live. These are fun cards. It's headlined with undefeated prospect Manuel Avila taking on Rene Alvarado of Nicaragua. Vila's 19-0 with 8 knockouts, California native. And Alvarado, always a tough out. He's lost 4 of his last 7, but he's only been stopped once, I believe. So at least only once recently. So, this will be a good step-up fight for Avila, the prospect. But like I said, check out those fights. They're fun, and it's free. If you have a computer, stream it. In Washington, D.C., same night, Adrien, the problem Broner, whose problems seem to be more outside the boxing ring than in it these days. He's going up against Ashley Theophane. For Broner, I talked about the arrest or the warrant for his arrest earlier. I think he somehow, through a lawyer or something, got everything delayed where he's able to go through with this fight. I think he'll probably turn himself in next week to handle all the legal stuff, but he should take care of business against Theophane, who I don't really see as a threat. Theophane is 39-6-1, 11 knockouts. The real sick part of this for me, it shouldn't probably be happening, the fight itself, but it is happening for Broner's WBA, whatever the fuck, 140-pound title, which he won against the Russian fighter last October. And that fight shouldn't have been a title fight. This fight shouldn't be a title fight. Again, the WBA, they are the laughing stock of boxing. The laughing stock of boxing. I don't love the sanctioning bodies, but not all sanctioning bodies are created equal. The WBA is the worst. And the saddest part about that is historically, the WBA is actually the oldest sanctioning body. They go back before the WBC. They had a different name back in the day, but historically speaking, they go back the furthest and have the longest legacy of all the sanctioning organizations. Yet they're the most corrupt. And they have so many titles and they sanction anything. You could take a homeless crackhead and a gorilla and have them fight in the zoo and the WBA would sanction it if you gave them some money. So that's what's going on Friday night. Saturday in Finland, Robert Helenius, remember him? Robert Helenius is fighting Johan Duhaupas, the guy that lost to Deontay Wilder last September and had one comeback win against a nobody. And for Helenius, he was 17-0 through 2011 and was a rising heavyweight prospect. I was never really sold on the guy. I just wasn't. I didn't see anything there to get excited about, but a lot of people were excited about him because he beat some guys who were former names. He's only 5-0 since 2011. He had some medical issues, I think, and I don't know if he had legal or promotional issues or what. I don't know the whole story there, but he's trying to get back in with this. And look, as much as I just dissed the WBA, this fight is for the WBC silver title, which is basically the WBC's interim position. So the winner of this fight becomes, I believe, the mandatory for the WBC heavyweight champion, who currently is Deontay Wilder, who's traveling over to face Alexander Povetkin. No date or venue given for that fight yet, so I still don't believe 100% that it's going to happen, but it should. And if we could wind up in a scenario here where if Duhaupas beats Helenius and Wilder beats Povetkin, we get to see Wilder Duhaupas 2, the rematch to save boxing. That could happen. Same night, this Saturday in Poland, Tomasz Adamek fights Eric Molina, the guy who lost to Deontay Wilder last June. There's a theme going here. And Molina, I think, won one comeback fight against the scrub as well. For Adamek, I don't know why he's fighting on at this point. There's nothing for him to do at heavyweight. He had a title shot against Vitaly Klitschko a few years back. He's had a couple of opportunities. I never thought the guy should have moved up. He should have created a legacy at cruiserweight because I think he could have. I would like one of these cruiserweight champions to stay at cruiserweight and set a real precedent in that division. It's yet to happen. Everyone thinks they're going to be Evander Holyfield. Guys, there's only one Evander Holyfield, and you're not it. So just, interesting names. You know what I'm saying? The boxing that goes on around the world. Boxing fans, at least here in the United States, I think sometimes forget that there's this world outside of America, and there's fights out there all the time, and those are just two examples of it. But other than that, a rather slow week. Let me know what you guys think, and we'll get talking about some of the fights coming up next week. And like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check out my article in this issue of Boxing Monthly, and I'll see you guys at the fights.